A so-called honour crime occurs when a female victim is attacked by her family for expressing her sexual or emotional independence. Last year, more than 5,000 such crimes were reported to police, but only 5% were then referred to prosecutors, and there were just 122 convictions. Compare this to domestic abuse, where 28% of cases are referred to the CPS. And it's clear police and prosecution forces are still tiptoeing around crimes occurring within communities from fear of offending minorities. The most striking thing about these so-called honour crimes is just how dishonourable they are. The victims are overwhelmingly women of colour, usually from a Muslim background, and are powerless to resist the violence of men who behave as if they own them. We must shed our collective inhibition and address these problems within communities like mine with full candour. If any society is to be judged by how it treats its minorities, then let the minorities within that minority be protected above all else.
Maajid, I'm really glad you raised the topic because I think it is one of the most underreported atrocities that's occurring in our society. And when you look at the statistics, it really is remarkable. There were 5,000 honour crimes reported and only 256 referred to prosecutors. So I agree with you. I think that this is abhorrent. I think that it's a disgrace that we are not doing more. However, I really take issue with your diagnosis as to what's going wrong, which is that you say that we're afraid of offending minorities, and that's the reason. Can I tell you what I think may be the reason?
Sure.
And, you know, that may be part of it, but when I look at other crimes that affect women of colour, as you mentioned, who are disproportionately the victims of so-called honour crimes, when it comes to domestic violence, which overall has a better prosecution rate than honour crimes, women of colour still have a less successful rate of having prosecutions. Women's groups like Women's Aid say that women of colour are much less likely to seek statutory help, often because they're concerned about their immigration status. They don't have access to public services. 95% of third sector organisations were hit by austerity. 100% of organisations that support women of colour were faced with cuts. And Women's Aid say that if you don't have support from a group in the third sector, you're much less likely to be able to see through a case to trial. So there are lots of things that support women in these really difficult processes that have been cut by austerity. They don't have the support. They don't have the same access to public services. And that's what I think we need to be addressing. Instead of saying this is just political correctness.
It is. Let me read to you something the World Health Organization have said. World Health Organization UK, in particular referring to the UK, have said in the UK and Sweden, research shows that social service and criminal justice systems have often characterised these murders as cultural traditions rather than as extreme forms of violence against women. This attitude and a general misunderstanding of the gender underpinnings of these crimes has led to inadequate legal and social protection for girls and women who are under the threat of crimes related to so-called honour in these countries. It's not just me. Yes, these other factors you mentioned do exist as well, but whether it's so-called honour crimes or it's FGMs, for which there hasn't been a single successful prosecution in this country, female genital mutilation, I think that there needs to be a debate about how, through legitimate fears of stoking racism, sometimes, as was with the case of Banaz, the infamous case of Banaz.
And we have an image, and she was murdered by her father.
And the documentary made on her story clearly showed the police inadequacy in dealing with this and them not taking her complaint seriously and wanting to keep it within the community.
Yes, but just before I bring this in, there are lots of other crimes against women where the police are still not dealing with them sensitively. To me, this feeds into the general pattern that women are often not taken seriously by the police, that women of colour find it even harder to access these kind of services. And so I'm not rejecting what you say offhand. I think that the voice of communities affected by this are crucial. Yeah. But I just think that when you say it's because we don't want to offend communities or it's political correctness, you just open it up to people who don't understand the complexity.
The World Health Organization is saying that's one of the factors.
Stop trading figures, the two of you. Maajid is absolutely right, and I've heard him talk very passionately on the radio station that you and I both feature on about this. One thing, you can quote figures all day long, and quite honestly, most people fall asleep or leave the room. Quite simply, that is what happened in Rotherham. That's what allowed the Rotherham sex scandal to continue. That is why some of the victims of the Rotherham sex scandal, one of whom's father was outside the house where she was being abused, banging on the door, trying to get his 14-year-old daughter, and he was nearly arrested and accused of racism. That is the reality of it. Don't bring other subjects. Don't bring other subjects in.
This is a different type of crime.
Why do you seek to bring other subjects in? This is a bigger. What Maajid has raised is big enough, even in itself,
and that's what. Related subject
He's right.
I don't understand what you're saying. We're talking about honour crimes, which are crimes within a community, right, where a woman usually is targeted by members of her own family.
But Afua,
you're talking about Rotherham, which is a completely different situation.
What I see the point of contact between you and Nick is that the authorities are reluctant to interfere in what they regard as a cultural cultural act. So that's why it took so long for anyone to be prosecuted for FGM, and why there are still very few prosecutions for FGM.
Well, there was one and it failed. Yeah.
And it failed.
So, yeah.
And it's because they think that's why we have to completely drop this word honour. It's nothing honourable about it. It should not be called honour killing. And this is why it's been allowed to be perpetuated, as if somehow the uncles and the brothers and the fathers are in some way justified in what they're doing, when it's a crime, it's a killing, it's nothing honourable at all.
Michelle, please.
Well, I would be interested to see where this process is falling down. Now, I've lived with domestic violence my whole childhood, and I know that we had the police involved many times, and, things never got to prosecution because my mum was very reluctant to press charges. And when I then apply that, and I think that I'm right in saying that actually the domestic violence laws have kind of evolved now so that even without victim kind of full cooperation, you can still progress a case. So I'd be interested in seeing, in the case of these honour crimes, which are disgusting. That case that you mentioned, not only was she murdered, she was raped, she was shoved into a suitcase, and it's disgusting. But where is this process falling down? Is it a case that actually things are getting reported to the police and they're not progressing because then the victim is afraid to continue? That's what I'm not sure.
Well, that's why I read what the World Health Organization says, which have looked into this, and they've said it's falling down because they are being mischaracterised as cultural traditions. Now, what you may or may not have known...
Cultural tradition, raping, murdering, shoving
exactly, which is what FGM was. Did you know that even forced marriage was only recently criminalised, which is why
Can I just pick up on the ban...
Very closely, what you may or may not have known is that there are 12 such so-called honour killings in this country alone every year. Right? That cannot be compared to this other stuff that you're raising. They are serious issues in themselves, but 12 women being murdered, most of them are women,
Let's
if not
hear
all of
from
them.
one of these victims as well. It's a Sky News report, and there's a victim here speaking through a translator.
I became pregnant, and even then the abuse continued. I was forced to have an abortion when I was 4 months pregnant. I wasn't allowed to speak to my family or anyone else during this time. If my father had not come to rescue me, my life would have ended for sure.
It's disgusting. And these communities should be rooting out the people that are performing these disgraceful acts, but I would be looking at the prosecution process, trying to understand where is it falling down.
I know Afua wants to come in, but I'll just very quickly touch on that, because actually when I said forced marriage was only criminalised recently, it was only 3 years ago. Guys, 2014, right? So we've got to admit there's a problem, that it took us until 2014 to realise that young girls are being forced into marriage in this country.
I don't know if we actually disagree, because I think we all agree that this is appalling and something urgent needs to be done, and I feel as passionately about that as you. I just want to come back to the case of Banaz Mahmood, because it was so extreme and it was well reported at the time. And if you look at her case, she had actually called the police and said, I think that they're going to kill me, and that was written off as a fantasy. So to me, that's bad policing, when a woman says she fears for her life, and that happens in different cultural contexts as well. 1 woman a week is murdered by her partner in the UK at the moment. That is happening. That's not being dealt with seriously.
Look at the
current or former partner.
But it's about
women of colour are affected more across the board.
Yes.
And with Banaz Mahmood as well, she then decided not to give evidence before she was murdered, because, like it's so often the case, women, it's very difficult within your community to give evidence against other people in your family, in your community. And I don't want to bang on about third sector organisations, but, in situations like the one you grew up with, Michelle, they're the kind of organisation that can come in and support a woman who's afraid to give evidence or struggling with the prosecution process. Those organisations play an absolutely crucial role, and they've been hammered. And when those cuts were made, they said women are going to die because of this. This is not a joke. So I'm not saying that that's the only answer, but it is part of the picture.
But we do agree then this is a disproportionate problem within certain communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.